Now, you've been portrayed in film not just once, but twice. Johnny Depp played you in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. And apparently he practically lived with you and shadowed your every footstep so that he could learn how to be Hunter S. Thompson. Is that true?
Yeah, he came up there, damn it.
What's the matter?
Never mind. Hey, you see my shoes here? I want you to get these things. Yes,
yeah.
Thank you. I made these shoes.
You made those?
I made them, yeah.
You didn't make those. Those have the Nike swoosh on them. You didn't make those. Hold that up.
Yeah.
Why, if you're making those shoes, why are you putting the Nike swoosh on them?
Yeah, it kind of has a panache to it, you know.
Yeah.
Style, yeah.
On February 20th, 2005, in his fortified compound called Owl Farm in Woody Creek, Colorado, Hunter S. Thompson, the man who created and perfected the energetic, first-person infused narrative style known as Gonzo journalism, and whose savage wit and electric prose made him a literary icon of the counterculture, sat at his typewriter with a glass of whiskey in one hand and a cigarette in the other. Known for his fearless reporting and wild lifestyle, Thompson had built a career chronicling the fringes of American society with brutal honesty and razor-sharp humor. From Hell's Angels in 1967 to the drug-soaked pages of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas in 1971, Thompson wasn't just a writer, he was the very embodiment of rebellion and iconoclasm, a larger-than-life figure who blurred the line between observer and participant in ways that were previously unthinkable to mainstream journalists, but have since become the norm in the modern era of opinion-focused news and hot takes from influencers and tastemakers. By 2005, however, Thompson's world had grown quieter. Already a living legend and hero to a certain subset of artists and thinkers, he continued to write sporadically, publishing collections of essays and political commentary. But the years of hard living were catching up with him. Even at half speed, his trademark sardonic wit and trenchant social commentary still vastly exceeded those of his peers in journalism. But Thompson himself felt the slippage from his heyday in the 60s and 70s, when his chronicles about the rise of Nixon and personal drug-fueled journeys through the counterculture truly shaped American thinking and pushed progressivism to its limits, much to the horror of conservatives. But now in his seventh decade of life, Hunter was no longer game for the fight. Chronic pain from a series of injuries, including a hip replacement and a broken leg, left him increasingly immobile and reliant on prescription medication. The man who once rode with outlaw bikers and covered presidential campaigns at full tilt now found himself confined, physically and mentally, in ways he never could have imagined. That Sunday afternoon, Thompson's son and his family were in town for a visit just down the hall. At 5:42, the famed writer picked up the phone and dialed his wife Anita, asking her to come home to help him finish an ESPN column he'd been struggling to complete. In truth, he hadn't even started it. Thompson then sat the phone on the kitchen counter with Anita still on the line, cocked a .45 caliber handgun, and fired a single shot. Anita initially mistook the cocking sound for a click on his typewriter keys and hung up the phone. Thompson's grandson Will and his daughter-in-law Jennifer were in the next room and reported hearing the muffled pop of a single gunshot, but they said they mistook the sound for a falling book and didn't check on Thompson immediately. His son Juan then discovered his father's body, called the sheriff's office, and walked outside to fire 3 shotgun blasts into the air to mark the passing of his father. The death of Hunter S. Thompson meant the loss of one of the sharpest and most irreverent voices in modern American history, a man whose very existence was a challenge to the establishment and a testament to the chaotic beauty of living life on your own terms. Though his end was as sudden and shocking as the life he led, his influence on journalism, literature, and American culture continues to this day. Hunter S. Thompson was just 67 years old. I'm Derek Kaufman.
I'm Jason Beckerman.
And this is Last Days, Hunter S. Thompson.
Although the public was surprised to learn of Thompson's sudden death, his suicide was perhaps not so shocking to those closest to him. Thompson had been in a dark place for some time, frequently complaining about his physical and mental diminishments. Bangs of frustration and even guns firing on the property were so common that nobody even thought to check on Thompson immediately after the shot was fired. His typewriter contained a future date, February 22, 2005, and a single word, counselor, typed on the page. Many have mused over the final word, but nothing has come up to offer additional meaning or depth. Some have speculated that it's his own version of the old man uttering Rosebud in Citizen Kane, but it's more likely a reflection of writer's block and failing to finish up his final headline before taking his life. A typewritten note written just days before was later discovered nearby and offers considerably more insight into his state of mind. Titled "Football Season is Over" and later published in Rolling Stone magazine, it was brief, cryptic, and inescapably Thompson. Quote, "No more games, no more bombs, no more walking, no more fun, no more swimming. 67. That is 17 years past 50. 17 more than I needed or wanted. Boring. I am always bitchy. No fun for anybody. 67. You are getting greedy. Act your old age. Relax. This won't hurt." Thompson's good friend and illustrator wrote in his own memoir about the sentiment, saying, quote, "He told me 25 years ago that he would feel real trapped if he didn't know that he could commit suicide at any moment. I don't know if that is brave or stupid or what, but it was inevitable. I think that the truth what rings through all of his writing is that he meant what he said. If that is entertainment to you, well, that's okay. If you think that it enlightened you, well, that's even better. If you wonder if he had gone to heaven or hell, rest assured he will check out them both. Find out which one Richard Nixon went to and go there. He could never stand being bored. But there must be football too, and peacocks."
People really poured over that last writing as essentially a suicide note. He had been struggling for years. Hunter S. Thompson was a late night fixture on shows because he was truly a rock star journalist. There's not many who can show up as a guest on, Letterman and Conan and things like that in his day. But he was that guy, and it was his directness. He was very, very odd, and he would put you off kilter. And those interviews, if you ever want to see them, they're really something to behold because he's sort of fearless in the face of celebrity. He's not into it very clearly. And that letter, it's just powerful. He's one of those writers who you pour over every single word he ever wrote.
He was chaotic, but there was a purpose to it, and there was always a sort of method to the madness. And so you take that, all those words that seem to be maybe tied together with sort of a randomness, but there's not a randomness there. If you break it down and friends and other sort of satirists and columnists and literary figures have poured over them and sort of found the thread that runs through it all. And it's not completely cryptic once you sort of start bearing down on it.
It's really not. His family has given a lot of interviews. He talked about suicide a lot.
Yes.
He talked about the wanting to be able to go out on his own terms. And when his body was discovered by Juan, his son, it wasn't this overwhelming emotion and crying. His son went outside before the cops came and he fired off 3 shotgun blasts.
Weird in its own right, by the way.
Something his father said, "Hey, when I go out, just take a shot and fire some shotgun blasts." And on August 20th, Thompson's ashes were fired from a cannon during a private funeral at Owl Farm, accompanied by colorful fireworks, while Norman Greenbaum's Spirit in the Sky and Bob Dylan's Mr. Tambourine Man blared in the background. The cannon was situated atop a 153-foot tower in the shape of a double-thumbed fist clutching a button of peyote, a symbol used by Thompson during his 1970 campaign for sheriff of Pitkin County, Colorado. According to Thompson's widow, Anita, the funeral cost $3 million and was funded by Johnny Depp, who became close friends with Thompson and even portrayed the famed Gonzo journalist in the 1998 film Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Depp said, "All I'm doing is trying to make sure his last wish comes true. I just want to send my pal out the way he wants to go out." The funeral was attended by several celebrities and political luminaries, including Jack Nicholson, John Cusack, Bill Murray, Benicio del Toro, Sean Penn, Josh Hartnett, Lyle Lovett, John Kerry, George McGovern, Ed Bradley, and Charlie Rose.
It's so interesting. That list of names, there are some real sort of establishment folks and some real anti-establishment folks. They all loved this guy.
That's right.
They were not just showing up to pay homage to him. They loved him. They were all friends of his. They found him endlessly fascinating. And I love the fact that you have this weird group of people that would never otherwise be in the same place together all come together for Hunter Thompson.
He was undeniably entertaining, so there was something about him that I wouldn't say he reached across the aisle. He was really grounded in his views and very, very countercultural and hated Richard Nixon with a fiery passion until his death. But his funeral was really this joyous occasion. Johnny Depp's whole career changed. We'll talk about it. He really poured himself into this Hunter S. Thompson fascination, did the movie, became very eccentric in ways like Hunter S. Thompson post doing that movie. And we'll get into that. That was what Hunter S. Thompson did to people. If he blew his way into your life, he changed it forever.
Hunter S. Thompson's legacy as a journalist stands as a fiery testament to the power of unfiltered truth told through a haze of chaos. Armed with a typewriter, a head full of hallucinogens, and a disdain for hypocrisy, his Gonzo journalism blurred the line between observer and participant, paving the way for the opinion-heavy musings of TV pundits, amateur bloggers, and inane Twitter posts from the peanut gallery that defined the modern era. Thompson's drug-fueled insights offered brutal clarity on the American dream's unraveling, and his savage critiques of Richard Nixon, whom he famously called a, quote, creature straight out of a nightmare, cemented his role as both chronicler and critic of American power. Thompson didn't just write about the madness of the world, he plunged headfirst into it, daring readers to do the same.
So what exactly is Gonzo reporting? This is the discussion you need to have about Hunter S. Thompson, because he invented it, essentially. And journalism before Hunter S. Thompson was largely obsessed with objectivity. I would say it was the Walter Cronkite era of journalism, where you were supposed to look at a white man sitting at a podium. He had a certain gravitas to him, and he was supposed to be dispensing news as it actually happened without any favor or bias. Hunter S. Thompson blew up that entire concept.
I think you can look at it during as Vietnam War era type journalism and post-Vietnam War era journalism.
That's a good way to cleave it, yeah.
Hunter S. Thompson deserves a lot of the credit for sort of making that cleave stark. Because even during Vietnam, as anti-establishment as it was, you didn't have people on the ground sort of talking about the emotions of the soldiers that they were feeling there. That came much later with the Oliver Stones of the world. At the time, it was told by Cronkite behind a desk. And now you move forward, and journalism is so different today, for better and worse, too. I mean, the fact that everything is done in the Twitter sphere is problematic, I think. But he deserves so much credit, or maybe blame, for transitioning us from where we were as journalists into what we are now.
I think that's right. He's a complicated figure. A lot of people look back at Cronkite and they say that was the way it should have been. When he announced Kennedy's assassination, he just did it in a very serious and somber way. And journalistically, we've come so far. People's opinions are what journalism is, and that's what Hunter S. Thompson brought to the fore. The style of Gonzo reporting, first coined by Bill Cardoso in 1970 to describe a Thompson article about the Kentucky Derby from back in 1970, is largely characterized by first-person narrative, incorporating the writer's own experiences and emotions to add color and immediacy to the reporting. The emphasis was on breaking free from the purely objective style of mainstream reporting standards at the time, like Walter Cronkite, who I mentioned, and his whole "that's the way it is," because that standard was seen as old-fashioned and misleading in some sense. Thompson said he based his style on William Faulkner's notion of, quote, fiction is often the best fact. Even though he wrote about true subjects, the Kentucky Derby, Richard Nixon, the NFL, etc., he heavily incorporated satirical devices, filtered his experiences through his recreational use of drugs and alcohol, and intentionally devoid of objectivity. He would say, quote, objective journalism is one of the main reasons American politics has been allowed to be so corrupt for so long. You can't be objective about Nixon. To some extent, all news is filtered through the humans reporting it, so there's inherent bias behind reporting. Walter Cronkite covered what he and the suits at CBS thought would resonate with viewers. The cameramen were instructed and sent to certain areas, the news was generated through copywriters, editors, and censors then modifying it, and then it finally got read aloud to massive television audiences. All throughout that process, there are judgments to be made that color what the end consumer receives. Hunter S. Thompson understood this reality and leaned into the idea that one's personal perspective intrinsically does and should shape the narrative presented to the reader. There's something more truthful about being forthright about those biases inherent in one's prose, rather than hiding behind some fiction of objectivity. And for the reader, his work was certainly more engaging than a dry read of the facts in a story from the Associated Press. Thompson ejected himself as a participant in the narrative, added metaphor, and deliberately blurred the lines between fact and fiction, sort of like Truman Capote did with his writing style with In Cold Blood. He knew he wasn't the same kind of reporter as Tom Wolfe, who would later describe Thompson's style as, quote, part journalism and part personal memoir, admixed with powers of wild invention and wilder rhetoric. As one writer put it, quote, while Tom Wolfe mastered the technique of being a fly on the wall, Thompson mastered the art of being a fly in the ointment.
And because Thompson was such an integral voice in his reporting, he was treated more like a rock star than just an average beat reporter collecting facts and regurgitating them with minimal intrusion of their own voice. He was the story in some very real sense, and his fans returned to read his energetic first-person participatory writing style with him as the protagonist, griping about Richard Nixon or stumbling through drug-fueled adventures in Las Vegas. As such, Thompson behaved a bit like a rock star, neglecting deadlines, demanding certain creature comforts like the right kind of typewriter or a certain color of paper, requiring the right drugs and booze, and working late into the night on his own schedule. Of course, The nature of this process made for a nightmarish editing process, bedeviling fact-checkers and creating just enough chaos for higher-ups to relent and publish his pieces with minimal changes. Robert Love, who edited Thompson for 23 years at Rolling Stone, said, quote, "You knew that you had better learn enough about the subject at hand to know when the rift began and reality ended. Hunter was a stickler for numbers, for details like gross weight and model numbers, for lyrics and caliber, and there was no faking it." Still, Love said fact-checking a Thompson piece was, quote, "a trip through a journalistic funhouse where you didn't know what was real and what wasn't." The edginess and danger inherent in Thompson's form of journalism should not be understated, and the blurred lines between fiction and reality created very real threats to his well-being. Thompson would often hide behind a surrogate character named Raoul Duke in his writing, who was basically Thompson's id, a callous, erratic, drug-loving, and self-destructive journalism. Rolling Stone editor Jan Wenner even once offered to pay for Thompson to get drug treatment, but Hunter politely but firmly refused the help, telling his boss the drug abuse was a key component of his talent, that if he didn't do drugs, he'd have the mind of an accountant. But he also knew that he'd built up a mythical figure through his writing that the real man couldn't possibly live up to. In a 1978 interview, Thompson said he felt pressured to live up to the fictional self he'd created, which endeared him to his legions of fans. He said, quote, "I'm leading a normal life, and right alongside me there is a myth, and it is growing and mushrooming and getting more and more warped. When I get invited to speak at universities, I'm not sure if they are inviting Duke or Thompson. I'm not sure who to be."
And then there was Thompson's politics, a blend of libertarian Second Amendment enthusiasm and distrust of big government, blended with traditional liberal beliefs in labor unions, drug legalization, and antipathy towards corporate America and Richard Nixon. He was a proud member of the NRA and co-created the Fourth Amendment Foundation to help people defending themselves against unwarranted searches and seizures. Thompson was an early supporter of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, NORML, and served on the group's advisory board until his death, saying, quote, "I think it's the only way to deal with drugs. Look at Prohibition. All it did was make a lot of criminals rich." Anti-capitalist sentiment was another pillar of his political persona, and he could often be seen wearing Che Guevara shirts and griping about Richard Nixon and George W. Bush. But even if his political leanings were obviously left of center, he was unsparing in his assessments of politicians on both sides of the aisle. He also had a penchant for conspiracy theories, like believing September 11th was an inside job, which only worsened over time as his paranoia increased, perhaps owing to decades of drug use. Jason, it's too tempting to think of what Hunter S. Thompson would have thought of Donald Trump.
Exactly. I think he would have hated Donald Trump. I think he would have hated the sort of
The bloviating loudmouth.
and also the flirtation with the truth that is, his definition of truth is what truth is. I don't think he would have liked him, but I also don't know in today's world whether he would have been liberal or conservative. He was a proud card-carrying member of the NRA, which was always at odds with kind of the more liberal fanaticism that he had. He was at once anti-establishment, but he also thought that government should get the hell out of the way.
Yes.
So he had these libertarian leanings. Maybe that's where he would have been politically in today's world. Maybe it's where he was in 2005.
I wrestle with it. It's a fascinating thought experiment because he hated Richard Nixon. That was his bête noire, right? And he's the consummate Machiavellian, behind-the-scenes, corrupt politician to American history. Donald Trump's different. Donald Trump is a bloviating loudmouth, but he acts as though he's speaking truth in his divisiveness. I wonder if Thompson would have felt bashful about having created the context for a figure like Donald Trump to rise in America, if he would have felt sort of responsible in some ways. There's a lot of overlap in the way they sort of approach the world. They're very different figures.
I think what Thompson would have struggled with, maybe he struggled with before his death because it's not that long ago, is the rise of sort of the Fox News style, the MSNBC style of journalism, where it really is purely opinion-based, right? There's very little fact, and all facts that are given are viewed through colored lenses in one way or the other. And I would have loved to. I mean, he was by the time he died, and by the time the 2001 thing came along, 9/11 came along, and the election of 2000 comes along. He was a little bit past his prime, and he wasn't sort of as influential. But I sort of do think about what his reaction to all of this would have been when he sort of sat back and said, "I built the chaos.
Yes,
now let it go."
A little bit. You have to wonder.
Perhaps his best-known work to many casual fans is his 1972 novel, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, which was adapted into two movies. First, loosely, in 1980, with Where the Buffalo Roam, starring Bill Murray, and again, more directly, in 1998, with Johnny Depp's movie bearing the same name as the book. The book followed Thompson's travels with a prominent Mexican-American activist and attorney named Oscar Zeta Acosta to Las Vegas to attend a drug enforcement conference. The two men become sidetracked by heavy drug and alcohol use, including tequila, rum, weed, mescaline, LSD, and lots of cocaine. It's now seen as a book chronicling the failure of the 60s counterculture movement and the principal vehicle for introducing Gonzo journalism into the mainstream. He parlayed the success into a franchise of fear and loathing projects, including coverage of the 1972 presidential election, in which he spent considerable time with Democratic candidate George McGovern and became highly critical of Republican nominee Richard Nixon. McGovern's campaign director described it as, quote, the most accurate and least factual account of the 1972 campaign. Literary critic Morris Dickstein said Thompson's style, quote, recorded the nuts and bolts of the presidential campaign with all the contempt and incredulity that other reporters must feel but censor out.
In December 1996, nearly a decade before Thompson took his own life, Johnny Depp produced a massive tribute to his literary icon at the Memorial Auditorium in Hunter's hometown of Louisville, Kentucky. It was a star-studded occasion, featuring special guests from Warren Zevon to Harry Dean Stanton, in addition to Depp himself. And Thompson attended the standing room-only event in his trademark sunglasses, perhaps wincing a bit at all the fuss, but finding moments to enjoy as fans and celebrities celebrated his body of work. He was still vibrant, hilarious, irreverent, and irascible, years removed from all the aches and pains that robbed him of these qualities near the end of his life and left behind merely the dark remnants of his personality. And as massive of a star as Johnny Depp was at the time in the prime of his career, the event stands out because Depp is clearly in awe of his hero, reading passages from his work on stage to a rapt audience and frequently checking nervously to see how it was landing with Hunter himself. For an actor of Depp's caliber, who reads countless screenplays from the best writers in Hollywood, it's truly telling to see just how deeply the power of Thompson's words impacted him. And so I thought it only fitting to give Depp the final word, heard here reading a passage from Thompson's legendary novel Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
Strange memories on this nervous night in Las Vegas. 5 years later, 6? Seemed like a lifetime, or at least a main era. The kind of peak that never comes again. San Francisco in the middle 60s was a very special time and place to be a part of. Maybe it meant something. Maybe not in the long run. History's hard to know because of all the hired bullshit. But even without being sure of history, it seems entirely reasonable to think that every now and then the energy of a whole generation comes to a head in a long, fine flash for reasons that nobody really understands at the time.